Hello and welcome back to the free online woodworking school. In this video, we're going to be getting the shaker table assembled. So next we're going to focus on sanding and actually pre-finishing the inside faces of this table, but we'll make sure to leave the area where those drawer runners are going to be stuck dry. So we're only looking to do inside faces here, insides of the legs, inside of these side rails, but we need to be careful not to take off too much so that it affects our joinery. And I think personally for a lot of this, I'm just going to use a really finely set plane to give each of these surfaces one skim, then maybe a few strokes with 240 and call it there. So I've just resharpened my plane. We'll just get it set up on this scrap block so I know that it's a really fine cut. And then one by one, I'm going to take these legs, for example, and just give this face 1 or 2 skims to clean up any of the machining marks and things, yet not take off enough material to start messing around with the shoulder lines on these. Same goes for these mortise and tenons here. These inside faces look a little bit ragged, and so just a couple of skims with the plane should be all they need. So we'll just keep an eye out for the grain direction. Make sure we're always working the wood in the way that it wants to be worked. Plenty of pressure from above. If you're not confident with a plane, you don't have to do it with this. Using sandpaper and a hard block would be okay. You've just got to be really careful not to pillow the edges. So it's incredibly easy to do that with sandpaper, less so with a plane with a solid bottom on it like this. Okay, so that's the inside of the legs done. Now onto the rails and stuff. So with these rails, we've got the inside faces that need to get done. These bottom edges technically could be seen if you look under the table. And then we've got the show faces as well, where the corners are going to be difficult to get access to after assembly because of the step created by the leg. And so what I'm going to do here is just transfer these letters to the tenons, and I'm also going to put them on the top edge here so that if they accidentally get lost, I've sort of got a second option to refer to. Let's do the inside first. Okay, and then we'll just do the bottom edge in the vise. Again, probably only 1 or 2 needed for this. There we go, there's our full width pass. Now on these side ones, because we've got a fair bit going on here with both screw holes and also, in the case of this top rail, threaded inserts, I'm probably going to avoid planing this inside face. I'll just skim over it with a bit of sandpaper later on to get rid of any burrs and things and call it that. But the outside faces definitely still need to be done because of the restricted access to these corners. Of course, with these side rails, if I remove material here, that kind of throws off the whole getting the drawer runners flush with the underside. But we're going to be taking a couple of skims off these as well, and so it should stay sort of in the ballpark we're looking for. Okay, so now we've got the front 2 rails and the 4 drawer runners. I'm going to do a couple of skims on all 4 faces of the front runners because you could technically see or feel them on all 4 faces. These drawer runners, however, I'm going to do the 3 exposed faces, and then that one where they connect against the side rails, I'm not going to bother with that. I'll just knock off any burrs that happened while drilling through them with some sandpaper afterwards. So again, let's just transfer our marks. Okay, so because I was able to get such a lovely finish from that plane with no tear out whatsoever, I think all these faces need now is just a couple of passes with some 240 grit, and that should get them all up to a nice universal standard. When doing this, really important to use a hard block. Things like cork blocks are quite popular for sanding, but they're really not that good for surfaces like this that you want to keep dead flat. Cork blocks are kind of better for surfaces like this workbench, where it's unrealistic to have it perfectly flat and you need a slight bit of flexibility in the block in order to conform to those undulations. With something like this, we've got it dead flat off the plane. We don't need a block that conforms to those lumps and bumps. We want it to maintain the flatness. So again, I'm really not going to go mental with this. That is all that face needs. So I'll do both of these inside faces. This area where the leg tapers, we can easily get access to it. This we can all get access to, and we can get access to that after assembly. So just those 2 inside faces is all we're looking to hit on each of the legs. Okay, so these, I've already gone and picked up a dent on that. Look, that's why this mat can be so nice. I think I'll replane that one. Start with another. So again, outside faces, just a few passes with some 240 grit. Shouldn't need much because the plane has done the majority of the work. A couple of skims on the underside. Yeah, we don't need much on this. This is mostly just for kind of deburring any areas around the holes. There you go. It's far from perfect, but that's just smoothed it out a little bit. And the other thing we can do on these side rails is we can take these sharp edges off these bottom corners, because again, once we've got legs in there, it's going to be quite difficult to finish them off neatly in either corner. So if we just do that now, 5 or so passes with some 240 grit, we'll just take that sharp edge off while maintaining a nice kind of crisp look. These kind of white cloudy patches you see are very, very small bits of tear out. And so scrubbing away with a bit of 240 grit isn't going to be the most efficient way to get rid of them. So to be honest, I'll probably just drop down to 120, scrub away what I can, and then work through 180 and back up to 240 so that I can attack this efficiently. Okay, so everything is sanded. With regards to all of the show faces where nothing's joining to it, it's just like the outside of the table or even the underside, I've made sure to get rid of all traces of tear out. There's no real excuse for having it there because nothing joins it, nothing interacts with it, it's just purely a visual face. However, that said, when it comes to things like the drawer runners, I've gone over them with a bit of 240 to get them nice and smooth and consistent, and you can't feel any tear out on them. But if you look at them, dust has kind of got into the areas of raised grain and it has made the tear out somewhat visible. But in instances like this, where there's going to be a drawer running over it, and we've dimensioned this very specifically, I don't want to start messing around with those dimensions by scrubbing off too much material. And so seeing as this is an internal hidden face, and it's got quite an important function to it, I decided to not take it too far. But of course there are internal faces within these runners that don't have anything joined onto them. So here where the bolts go through the front, there's nothing joining onto that. The drawer doesn't go over it. Might as well clean up all of that. As for this dovetailed front rail, the front edge that you'll see when you're looking at the table is completely free of tear out. I've got that perfect. The rest of these ones, like the underside and the back face, is again all smooth, but there are very small patches of tear out in places, but it's not so much that it feels rough, it's just a visual thing if you were looking very carefully for it. And again, all the exposed edges of these joints have been slightly softened. The only one I haven't got around to doing yet are the legs. And with these, I'm just going to soften all 4 edges around this kind of joint area. And it should be fine because softening the edge isn't going to affect the joint whatsoever because the edge isn't flush with the tenon. What I'm worried about here is assembling it, trying to soften that edge and accidentally putting cross-grain scratches in this bit. Might as well just go along now. Just around these areas. That makes it a little bit less risky later on. Don't technically need to do this outside edge, at least it makes it nicer to handle in the meantime. Right, so we'll just get this dry assembled. Check that I've definitely moved all the markings to the right places and that we haven't catastrophically adjusted any of the joints. So I'll just kind of check all of these edges, make sure that everything is definitely been softened. That's all good. And it looks like, yeah, I've actually forgotten to do the back side of this mortise and tenon and the underside there as well. But otherwise, everything else feels good. Okay, so I've just vacuumed down the surface. Next, we're going to pre-finish all of these inside faces that we've sanded, not only because of access issues later on, but also to help with cleaning up any glue squeeze out that happens when we bottom out these mortise and tenons. You know, there's going to be lots of intricate corners that we got to get into with a chisel to try and get out glue, and it's going to be a bit of a nightmare. Whereas if we've got something to resist that glue from bonding, such as this Hardwax oil, then it should make our job much easier later on, so it's worth doing now. Also, you get a sneak peek at the grain, which is always nice. The only thing I'm going to do first is just stick a bit of tape up the inside faces of these side rails, because that's where I'm going to be adding a drawer runner. Giving myself quite a wide boundary for now. It's actually only kind of 15 millimeters wide. So we'll stick that there, bring back the tape on either side so we still get a nice pre-finished area up against the joint that's going to get squeezed out. And then we can just sort of finish this area around the drawer runner when we come back to do a second or third coat later on. So we're just looking at doing inside faces where joints are going to intersect, making sure not to get any finish within the joint. I'm not really worried about these shoulders around it because they don't really add much strength anyway. Okay, so by this point, everything's pre-finished. We've softened all the edges that may be difficult to access after assembly. And so we can start thinking about the first stage of the assembly, because we're going to break this down into a couple of parts to make it a bit more manageable. And we've actually still got a few bits to do on some of these components before bringing it all together. And so we're going to start by assembling the side frames. The reason for this is because with both of these assembled and glued together, we can simply get the rest of the components and sandwich them in between. These can be completely dry, all ready to go. And we've only got to focus on gluing 6 joints as opposed to 10. And while they're together like this, the other thing I'm going to do is just move this tape to the outsides of the joints so that if we get any glue squeeze out, it'll spill onto the tape and we should just be able to peel it away, because these internal corners might be difficult to peel stuff out of afterwards. Scrap that. We're using blue tape because I ran out of the other one. Okay, so they're all taped off. When you do this, make sure to pick a tape that doesn't leave a sticky residue behind or isn't so sticky that when you peel it away, it starts ripping out the grain. As you see, normally I use a pink low tack tape. I'll put a link to it in the description. I have also started using this blue tape recently, which is proving to be really nice. And so what we're going to do with this is we're going to get 2 clamps on each of these joints because we want to get the legs in line, I guess, or in planar with each other. I don't know what the terminology is, but we want to make sure the legs aren't doing something like this. And by having 2 clamps on it, it sort of helps you twist them into position. So we'll just get them sort of nipped up for now. And we need to leave a small gap between the clamps because we're going to get a winding stick in there. And I will say this is going to be a horrible example because this back leg, remember that dark one that's been haunting me through the whole project, has distorted disgustingly since we began working on it. So we're going to put 1 at the front of the leg, 1 at the back, and I'll actually put a clamp at the back here just to bring it all up to the same height. And now you can hopefully see, I mean, it's so obvious already, but as you lower your gaze, that silver winding stick at the back is poking out above the black one. And so we can easily see that that back left corner is sitting way too high. You don't even need to lower your vision to see that. So we're going to see what we can do about it. So we'll just loosen this one here. I'll lift up this leg, push this one down, and you will sort of feel the joint creak slightly. We might even be able to just sort of do that. One thing to bear in mind with this is that you need to be adjusting it all up here. There's no point just bending the legs into position and fixing them down here, because if this is flexing from the joint downwards, as soon as you take pressure away, it's just going to spring back. All the twisting forces need to be happening up here where there's actually going to be glue supporting it. So take 2. It's a little bit better. See if we can do a bit more. And you'll notice we're doing all of this before putting glue on it. We just want to see what sort of position we can get this into before doing it with glue that's actively drying and we're panicking. So I'm just pushing the leg up with this hand down here at the moment and pushing the other one down with my elbow. Honestly, this is probably like a worst case scenario. The only reason you'd have distortion this bad when you sort of dry clamp a piece is because you've got really loose mortise and tenons and you just happen to clamp them up out of line. It should be quite easy to get back into position, but with these mortise and tenons being so tight, this amount of twist is purely down to the distortion. I think that's probably as good as I'm likely to get it. If we sort of look along this leg, the worst bit is just that last bit that kind of flicks up. So we'll kind of see it when it's all together, but the majority of the leg, I would say, is in line now. So we know what's possible with that. Let's take it apart, put it aside and test the other one. This one should hopefully be a bit more friendly. This one's much closer. Perfect. So we're all happy with that process. It's always worth doing a dry run just so you know that there's no kind of unforeseen things that you haven't kind of planned for. So I'm just going to put some in the walls of the mortises. Don't go too mental with this because remember you've got another one coming into the side and you're just going to have loads of glue to pick out when fitting the other tenon if you go too over the top with this. We'll just put it all at the top and when the tenon goes in it will push it down. A little bit on the side of the tenon as well. Don't forget the bottom. And we'll also just do a tiny bit on the end grain as well. Okay, so we've checked for twist. We've checked that it's flush on the top, or at the very least the rail is poking above the legs ever so slightly, just so we can plane this down rather than end grain. And so now all we'll do is just take a little peek into these mortises and we'll just see if we can sort of spread out or remove any of this glue in here. I'm just going to use a bit of cardboard to make sure we haven't got any hard beads. So then we should be able to get the other tenon in position without too much restriction. And as for this glue on the outside, we'll just wait for it to slightly tack up or even completely harden before peeling away that tape, as it'll make it a lot less messy than doing it while it's still wet like that. So next we'll do the same with the other legs and see what we can do with this. Well, we know what we can do because we've done a dry run. See if we can repeat it. We'll see if that holds. I've actually got it better than I did during the dry run, so yeah, fingers crossed that plays out. Anyway, while those are drying, we need to start thinking about how we're going to attach the top of this table. And I'm actually planning on using these really small angle brackets. And the reason I chose these is not only because they're very small, but because they've got an expansion slot in them, which will help account for any sort of wood movement on the top and prevent things from tearing themselves apart. Now I'm actually going to do a veneered top on this table, which shouldn't move whatsoever because we're either going to do it onto plywood or MDF, both of those being very stable materials that won't expand and contract. However, many of you won't like the idea or the look of veneer, and so you'll want to go for a solid top, and that's where you'll want to be using these brackets that I've already misplaced. So I'm going to demonstrate this as if we were doing a solid wood top that will expand and contract, even though in actual fact on this table I'm doing a veneered top that should stay pretty stable. So this is the back rail of the shaker table, and this is going to be the one that we fit our two expansion brackets onto, and then we're also going to put two fixing points on the front dovetail as well. And with this we're simply going to drill two holes and bolt through them to threaded inserts on the underside of the top. And the way we're going to do this is with the front rail we're going to drill those holes to the exact same size as the bolt, so that if the top were to expand and contract from front to back, it stays fixed at the front and all the movement happens at the back. Therefore, you're not kind of changing the offset at the front. That's basically the datum point, and all of the movement happens back here. And so with that in mind, you need to pay attention to the direction that these brackets are installed, because these will only allow expansion in one way. You can get some slightly larger ones that have two 90-degree slots, and so you can put them wherever and just screw through the hole you need, but clearly they're going to be a little bit bigger than these. And another thing to note here is all of this wood movement is assuming that when you fit the solid wood top, you've got the grain going horizontal, because wood tends to expand across the grain, it doesn't expand along its length. And so if you're looking at the table from your position now, and for whatever reason you want the grain going front to back, you now need to allow for expansion side to side, and so these brackets would actually need to be mounted on the side walls to orient this expansion hole in the correct direction. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you're fixing these brackets. Make sure you're aware of which way you want the top to be oriented so that you can account for the expansion in the correct direction. Most of the time in tables like this, grain will be going horizontal to where you're looking at it. The main exception I would say is that if you've got a book match top where you've got two solid bits, you open them up and you want to mirror that grain in the middle, sometimes you'll have that running front to back just to provide an accurate mirror pattern rather than it be sort of 90 degrees to the viewer. Anyway, that was a lot of talking. Let's get these nested in. So I'm probably going to go in about 30 millimeters from each side and there. Of course, you don't need to nest these in like I am. You could just screw them onto the face if you really want. And then what I like to do is put a square up to that line we've just marked, put the bracket against it, so it kind of gives you a solid stop, and then mark the other side of it. That should give you two lines that are the exact width of the bracket. Do the same here, so just put the knife into the mark, slide the square up to it, remove the knife, put the bracket in position, and then knife just there. Next, get a marking gauge, set that to the depth of the bracket, and then mark that between the two lines that you've got, and then join everything up. We could also, if we wanted, set the marking gauge up to the depth of the bracket and score that along this top edge so we can see how deep we need to cut. So then we'll just get these chopped out with a series of cuts across the grain. Okay, and then we'll just get a pokey tool, mark where the screw needs to go, small pilot. And because these brackets aren't countersunk, I'm just using a dome-headed screw for this. Okay, there we go. Brackets in position, expansion slots along the top, nested in nice and neat, so even if you don't like the look of brackets, at least we went as far to do that. And the screws are clocked as well, so other than giving these brackets a bit of a polish, which I could do, that's about as good as we'll get with them. There are kind of more traditional ways of doing stuff like this, where you fix a top in position while still allowing for expansion. I think they're called buttons. I'll overlay them on here. I've never done them before though, because to be honest, they just look a bit of a faff. Modern technology's given us brackets these days, so why not use them? Anyway, let's get the holes done on the front rail now. So for this, it is pretty simple, literally just drilling 2 holes in the front. Probably put these in sort of 25mm from each shoulder line. And then also just mark the midpoint with a marking gauge to give ourselves a couple of crosshairs. And what I'll do with this before we go ahead and drill them out is I'll just take note of that measurement. I'm pretty sure that once these holes are drilled, we can still get in from underneath and mark the top. But just in case, if we take the measurement now, before there's 2 gaping holes in it, we can just mark the top separately and we know it'll line up. So that's 149. Hole spacing 149. So give ourselves a more prominent mark, and then we'll drill these holes to the same diameter as the bolt. And these are some nice stainless steel countersunk Allen head bolts that I've got. And so not only do they look quite neat, but because it's an Allen key, we can use that right angled head to get into the drawer front and tighten them up nice and easily. So I'm going to drill these out in the drill press. If you don't have one of these, just try and get it as plumb as possible by eye. Okay, and then we'll just give them a bit of a countersink on the inside. We don't want this sticking proud whatsoever, because that's going to affect the drawer. So that's really nice there. Right, these should be dry now. Completely forgot to peel off the tape before leaving last night. So we're going to see how we get on with this. That was a bit of a faff. I definitely could have benefited from doing that while the glue was still gummy, but it's fine. We should be able to clean up the remainders of that when it comes to the sort of final finishing stages. We need to get the rest of it together now. So we're pretty much going to do the same thing as before. We'll get it all assembled and then get the winding sticks on it to check that these 2 legs are, I still don't know the word for it, coplanar to each other. Okay, we've got a bit of a twist going on. So same process as before, just loosen the clamps, give them a bit of a tweak, re-tighten the clamps and see where that leaves you. Perfect. For the front at least. See if the back's the same story. I'm not holding out on this because of this dodgy back leg we're working with, but yeah, it's not looking good. But to be honest, I'm not sure there's a whole lot I could do about that. It's just all over the place. Is it noticeable when it stands up? Kind of, but not too bad. I think we're just gonna have to live with that and get it glued up as is. I mean, the rest of it's lovely. It's all closed up really nicely. Everything's sitting where it should do on top. It all looks really nice and aligned on the bottom. And if we look at the brackets on the back, you can see that the expansion slots are oriented the correct way, so that if we were to do a solid wood top on this with the grain going horizontal on it, we've got 2 fixed points at the front and then room for it to expand at the back. The only thing I am noticing is along the top here, we seem to have a twist going on there. And I imagine that once we get the top on, it should sort of pull that flat, but I'm going to see what happens when we try and flatten that out and see how that affects the legs. Angling the clamps has overcorrected now, and it did so mainly when I adjusted that front one, I guess because there's only 2 small kind of gluing surfaces. It's much easier to skew those than these mortise and tenons at the back that have a huge surface area in them. Okay, that's looking better. Those front legs are now slightly off, but not so much that it could become a problem. These back ones, let's see what's going on here. Oh, look at that. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's better. I mean, you can still see that the back leg is doing something weird at the back, but it's only noticeable if you know to look for it. So while it's in position, we are going to take the opportunity once again to tape off all of the joints, and hopefully this time remember to peel off the glue while it's still gummy. Okay, so now to do it with glue, and just follow whatever process you happen to do the first time round when doing your dry run. If you find these mortise and tenons go a bit wrong and like for whatever reason they're not, I don't know, closing up or just causing problems that you didn't foresee, you can always just glue these 2 mortise and tenons, put the dovetail in dry, and then glue that in a later stage if you really want, because you can still remove the dovetail even with these 4 mortise and tenons glued. Okay, so it's all together. Funnily enough, the back legs are playing ball now, so we'll live with that. The front ones are slightly off, but it's, you know, looking at it like this, it's really not too noticeable whatsoever. Happy to live with that. We'll just wait for the glue to tack up a little bit, let it get all gummy, and then we'll come back with the chisel to peel it away. Okay, so that is now all assembled, rock solid. The legs look pretty good, even though I know they're not perfect. So the final thing we need to do now is the side drawer runners. We've got a little cavity on the side there to fill to prevent the drawer from going in and sort of wobbling side to side. This should be pretty simple because if the shoulder lines on your dovetails and mortise and tenon are the same as the shoulder line on this back mortise and tenon, this cavity should be perfectly parallel. So all you need to do is insert a strip of wood in there that's flush with the inside face of this back leg and flush with the inside face of the front leg. Do the same on the other side, and then you can be sure that when they both go together, it's parallel. If for whatever reason when you've built this, these shoulder lines on the front and back have not ended up the same size and you've got a cavity that widens at the back or pinches at the back, now's going to be your opportunity to adapt these drawer runners to make that cavity parallel. It's going to be easier if this cavity widens at the back because you've just got to basically add a wedge shape, and the drawer should still be pretty close to these two front edges. It's going to be a bit more difficult if it pinches at the back because of the way the wedge shape works. You might end up with a larger gap on the side of the drawers, and so it's up to you. Just bear in mind that you can adapt these drawer runners to suit whatever you've kind of ended up with after the glue up. So for me, the size or the thickness of this drawer runner looks like it has to be 7 on the back, 7 on the front, maybe just like a hair over, just over 7 and about 7. So I've got 2 bits that are due to be the side runners. We just need to shoot these down to length, and then we'll get finessing the thickness down to the thickness we require. Okay, so at the moment they're just kind of wedged in there. You can see we've got a little bit of a lip at the front that we need to plane down and sort of finesse that fit. But this is a good stage to kind of start with. I have labeled which side goes where and which is the front and back, so I can get it back in the same position every time. And I'm going to do it between the wagon vise. This is one of those situations where that Wonder Dog I mentioned in the previous episodes would be too thick. You wouldn't be able to access the top. There's a couple of ways around this. You could firstly get a dog with an adjustable height like this, and so you use that as your backstop, and then you could have the Wonder Dog much further back and clamp a thin piece of material between this dog and the piece of material, and so that you've got a little bit of clearance between this large block and the piece that you're trying to plane. The other alternative, which is something I do anyway if I'm working with really thin material that gets distorted when I tighten this up, is to simply just use a bit of double-sided tape. Get it on your bench, stick the piece down. The tape I use in particular is by Tessa, which is kind of the gold standard in the furniture industry these days. So I'll put a link to that below, but let's get planing this down. So we're just checking it frequently, taking off more of the front or the back as needed. So this needs more off the back at the moment, and just go nice and steady until we get the fit we want. And I reckon all we'll do here is do a mixture of super glue and wood glue. We'll use super glue as the clamp and then wood glue for the sort of longevity. A few dabs in the middle, a few dabs at the side. I probably should have measured for it to be central in the height of the cavity, but never mind. We'll just make this other side the same. Yeah, it looks kind of weird with them being towards the top like that. I forgot to mark it out when I was gluing it. I just sort of panicked, but it's fine. They'll serve their purpose up there. You could even put them down in the bottom corner if you wanted. It's really up to you. I've also got to get in and finish that little area underneath as well. Oops. But little setbacks aside like that, that is how you prep and assemble the shaker table. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one where we're going to begin laying out the drawer.